This is the Powered Up Podcast, show 111.
Learning inside the classroom how they should treat our community and our ecosystems and natural resources outside of the classroom. So we try to make their learning real world relevant for them as much as possible.
Welcome to a real-world education with insight and advice from teachers in the game, where current and former educators reveal what truly sets apart the great teachers and what it takes to make a positive impact on students. Whether you're in pre-service learning, new to the game, or a seasoned veteran, this is the show for you. You'll leave feeling inspired to take action because we are powering education by empowering you.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? This is Ken Ehrman, host of the Powered Up Podcast, and I am here with my trustworthy co-host, Mr. Matt, the Fly Fisherman Rogers. Matt, how are we doing today?
I have never gone fly fishing in my entire life. So I got a fun fact for you. Do you know what the capital of Alaska is?
Juneau.
Do you know that it is the only state capital that is inaccessible by road?
No, I did not know that.
It's pretty fascinating. Do you know?
And I will also say that I probably know 3 state capitals, and you asked me a state that I know.
Well, I'm here to boost you up, power you up. That's all. Take a guess how many lakes there are in Alaska.
I'll go with 123.
A little bit more.
How many?
3 million. Oh my gosh.
Wow. So in case you're wondering why we're talking about some Alaska facts, we had the 2022 Alaska Teacher of the Year, Kelly Shrein, on our podcast tonight. And not only was she an incredible guest, an incredible teacher, but a lot of our conversation was centered around her involvement of the community, of the Alaska culture, of the culture of her students, which was much more diverse and much more different than I expected to learn about students and people living in Alaska, and just the way that she's authentically doing it in her science and social studies class, most specifically.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think some of the things that we hear, we have these expectations of what Alaska's like and what we assume, because I've never been there. Ken, have you ever been to Alaska? So we make these broad generalizations that, they live in a certain environment or that it's dark all the time. And while that is definitely a factor and feature, it was fascinating to see her be so enthralled with where she lives. She loves living in Alaska and loves the people, the culture, the history, the resources, which is really, I think that's necessary when you probably live in an environment like that and have to teach about it and embrace it like she does. So a really cool conversation that mixed us learning a little bit about Alaska and how teaching is similar and how it's different, but also just good teaching practices, that it doesn't matter what corner of the earth, good teaching is good teaching.
Absolutely. Yeah. She spent a lot of time educating us, like you said, on their culture and how she involves it into the classroom, and a big focus too on establishing those relationships amongst her students and that positive classroom community to facilitate an environment where they can learn and they can trust and they can appreciate each other. So without any further delay, let's jump right into our conversation with Kelly Shrein.
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. You can find out more at teachbetter.com/podcasts. Now let's get back to the episode.
Hi, Kelly. Welcome to the Powered Up Podcast. How you doing today?
I'm doing really well. Thanks for having me, Ken.
Absolutely. We are really excited to have you here with us. So to kick things off, please officially introduce yourself to our audience. Let us know where you are coming from and give us a little bit of a snapshot into your career in education.
Sure. So I am in Anchorage, Alaska. I was born and raised here. My roots are planted deep here. I love the community that's here in Anchorage. I love the culture that is here, the diversity that's here. And I work at Kincaid Elementary School, and it is in the Anchorage School District. We just have one large district. And I have been teaching for 10 years, and I have taught all grades K through 5.
Awesome. So I'm excited to talk to you for many reasons. You obviously are an incredible educator. You didn't say this in the beginning, but I'll say it for you as the 2022 Alaska Teacher of the Year. So obviously you are making a huge difference and impact on education. Selfishly, I'm excited to talk to you because you're from Alaska, and we are in pursuit of talking to at least one teacher from every state, and you are our first guest from Alaska. So congratulations on that.
Yay, I'm so excited.
So you mentioned about your roots being from Anchorage. You've taught your entire career in Anchorage. You love the community, the diversity. So educate us first, just about Anchorage. What are things that, us being from Pennsylvania, many of our listeners being from the continental part of the United States, we don't know a lot about Alaska. So what is important about Anchorage? What makes that community special?
Oh my word, that's a great question. I don't even know where to start with that. I would say that something that makes the community so great is the variety of, like I said earlier, the culture here, the people here. We truly are one big, tight community here. There have been years where in my classroom I have had over 13 different cultures representing our classroom alone, many different languages spoken. We have a lot of Alaskan Native culture spoken, a lot of Pacific Islanders who speak, their languages, and just we have such a big variety of different cultures here. Like I've said, it makes for such a great place to teach. It makes for such a great place to grow up. I was a product of the Anchorage School District, and I feel like I just can't imagine having been anywhere else, and I can't imagine teaching anywhere else. Anchorage is just incredible, and Alaska as a whole. Let's see, there's so many things that I could talk about that makes Alaska special. Summers definitely make Alaska
give us one really specific one that we probably would not expect to hear.
Well, not here in Anchorage specifically, but in many Alaskan communities, rural communities, there are times where schools will shut down because the importance of getting together as a community and participating in fishing and hunting and whaling as a community is more important than being in the school on that day, learning in the classroom, which I think is really
very interesting.
important, really interesting, something different that you might not have heard, but very important as a community to get together and do those things that are culturally important for Alaskans.
Down here we have, first day of hunting is about the closest connection that I can have. And even that has been adjusted, at least in Pennsylvania, to make it not impede the school year. I guess hearing about your, obvious love for Anchorage and Alaska as a whole, for us, we have some very general perspectives of what life in Alaska might be, from the most extreme assumptions, whether it's, tremendously amount of sunlight during the summers and very dark during most of the year is a very, I'm sure, generalization. But can you kind of share whether they're misnomers or anything about what life is like in Alaska and maybe how that influences schooling and what a day is like? I know for us, we're finally getting to the point where we are leaving school when the sun is still out. That is a victory for us in Pennsylvania. But if you can kind of speak to that at all.
Sure, absolutely. So like you said, during the winter months here in Alaska, it's very dark. There are days where a lot of communities in Alaska do not see the sunshine. Here in Anchorage, we do have daylight. I think our shortest days, they're 4-hour days, 5-hour days that we get, and then the sun, and we don't even really see the sun during that time either. It kind of it rises maybe, I'm trying to think of our latest time, 10:30 or 11 in the morning. So kids will get to school when it's really dark, pitch black, and then they will leave school when it's dark and pitch black outside. We get out right now at 4:00 p.m. We start our days at 9 a.m. It does have a negative effect on a lot of students. So teachers are very purposeful when they set up their classrooms. We have a lot of lamps and Christmas lights, and we just try to have our classrooms be as bright as possible because it can have a negative toll on our students' mental health as well as other adults' mental health. And then in the summer is extremely important to us because we do have days where the sun doesn't even really set. It'll kind of come down and then stay where our land is, where the horizon is, and just kind of come right back up. And so we have really long, as you mentioned, summer days. And those days and times are really important for us too because we obviously don't have a lot of sunlight during the winter. And families get out a lot during that time and live off of the natural resources in our land and go hunting and go fishing. Fishing's a big one. And we could stay out until midnight and the sun would still be outside. And those are cherished. And I was just mentioning to Ken before you got on and we started recording that we've had a record snowfall this year in Anchorage. And so we've had so many days that we've had to make up for the school year. And so we had a couple of options of either adding 30 minutes on to our school days until March to make up for those missed snow days that we've had, or we could have made up those snow days at the end of the year and tacked it on at the end of May. But so many people rely on those very special short summer days. And so we decided as a community that wasn't good.
It's so interesting to see how that has an impact. And I love how you said as a community, we decided that wouldn't be best for the students, for the teachers, and for the parents to have that time with their children over the summer. It's very interesting. So bring us into your classroom a little bit more. What is special or different about your classroom and the experience that your third graders right now are getting as they have you as your teacher?
I feel like I mentioned earlier that I have such a variety of students in my classroom and so many different families. They all bring such an amazing element to the classroom for me. And I feel like every year I learn so much from my students and their families that I knew nothing about. Even being born and raised here in Anchorage, I still learn. There's so much to learn about everyone's different cultures. And I feel like that's what makes our classroom so special. First and foremost is that we are also different. We learn how to work together. A lot of students are learning from each other. And I feel as if I get to benefit from that. It's very special. And I get to see everything unfold in the classroom and have adults come in and share their experiences. Elders come in. And so I think that's probably the most important thing that I can think of in my classroom right now. What was the other part of your question? You might have to repeat questions for me.
You dug into a little bit, just things that make your classroom a little bit different and special for your kids. So I love how you're talking about getting to know your students and appreciating their different perspectives. You mentioned bringing some adults in, but if you really dig into it, what do you feel that you do to really genuinely get to know your students? Because it's something that we constantly hear on this podcast as being so important for us to establish relationships with students. And it's something you hear all the time. And at the same time, a lot of what you read and what you hear, there's not something specific that teachers share that they do to establish relationships. We just say we need to have relationships with our students. So what are some strategies or things that you do with your students to really get to know them as an individual person? And also, part of that's going to be learning that culture and that background of the student.
My overall teaching philosophy that I apply in my classroom is that students should learn to be a positive part of their world and their community. And in my classroom, I specifically encourage kindness, empathy, and my students' ability to meet expectations. And I feel like through these nurturing lessons and activities that my students are more willing to push through difficult tasks without fear of failure. I do have a lot of students who come from backgrounds of trauma, and I feel like these lessons, they help my students recognize that they are capable of more than they ever dreamed. And I feel like this builds a level of trust with me for the next obstacle that they may face in my classroom or honestly in their personal lives. I mean, I want my students to know that I see them as a person first. I respect them as a person. They are someone's child in my classroom, and I want them to feel like this is their classroom and they're valued and they're honored and they're respected. And that builds that foundation of relationship, our relationship before they can start learning. I feel, especially with my students of trauma, if that makes sense.
And I think, you know, we we are, as a, you know, a collective in this career, learning more and more about trauma. Kids unfortunately are experiencing it, whether unfortunately it was purposely done to them, which is horrible, but sometimes, you know, just situationally it can develop trauma. And, you know, it's incredible how resilient kids are, but they can't push through it all. I guess what we find is more and more the values that we set in our classroom end up being the guidelines for a lot of these kids of how to morally grow up. And that directly influences your community, as it does mine, as it does Ken's. And there's a huge responsibility with that. Can you kind of talk about, because I'm sure, like most schools, the school ends up being the epicenter of, you know, a town's climate in a lot of ways, or a huge contributing factor. Can you share a little bit about how your efforts in your classroom and your school kind of help blur the line to positively improve the climate and the general culture of your local community?
Sure. So I believe that my students' education doesn't just end in the classroom. I don't, you know, I feel like a lot of people think that, you know, they come to work or they go to school, they teach their hours or they work their hours, and then at the end of the day, it's over and their job's done and they don't have to think about things anymore. But for me, I feel as if, like I said, education doesn't end in the classroom. And if I see my students in the community, you know, we say hello, we talk to each other, I talk with the family. I want them to know that, you know, when I say I care about students inside of the classroom every day, I want them to know that I also care about them outside of the classroom. And so does every educator in the building, from the principal to other teachers to instructional coaches. This is a safe place for students, especially students who feel like maybe they don't have that safe place at home, and they can always come to an adult in the school, and we want them to feel like this is a second home for them, and we're family and we're here for them. Speaking to how I believe that you asked about community, how they are a part of the community. So you're gonna have to maybe cut some of this out.
You're fine. So just that really, like, what that trickle down is, with schools being so important to community. Obviously, the values you're teaching in class, you hope the kids go out and utilize in your community, but also how are your efforts at school or your communities intertwined with how you go about your day and responsibilities in teaching?
Yeah. So for example, we have a whole unit on salmon anatomy and salmon dissection, because we want students to not only learn how to value the natural resources that are so important to Alaska, but also learn how to handle the fish. It's really important that they're respectful to the fish. We want them to know internal anatomy of the fish, external anatomy of the fish. And so I feel like that's really important. And the reason I bring that up is because, I mean, people listening may think, you know, how is that exactly relevant to the community? But here in Alaska, that's huge for the community, how to live off the land and how to handle animals respectfully. And so I've had students from past years after we've done our salmon lesson come back and say, when I went fishing this summer, I remember what you said. When we fished for rainbow trout, we made sure not to touch that middle line because it's sensitive for fish. And students would often talk about how many people who catch salmon or trout would take off the fillets and get rid of the head and the bone and the tail and internal organs. But there are a lot of Alaskan communities that utilize the whole fish. And so we try to teach them to utilize the whole fish. We have a lot of communities that and families here that make fish head soup. And there's a lot of nutrients in the fish head. And just the overall importance of fish and natural resources to our way of living in Alaska. And I have had a lot of students come back and talk about that. And just how to be a big part of their community beyond the classroom when you're fishing and hunting for your family, when you're how you treat people in the community, things like that.
I love what you're sharing, and what I'm intrigued by is just how much you're involving your local community, your local resources. It's something that I think teachers strive to do a lot of, making things real world and applicable to their local community, the nation as a whole, or internationally, kind of depending on their content and the age level of the students that they have. What are you doing? Please go ahead.
I was just going to say, yeah, it's a salmon are a critical resource to Alaska's people and ecosystems, and a huge way of life. And so I feel like, my passion for this topic of including your community into what we're teaching makes learning relevant, and it has a importance to the ecosystems of Alaska and a cultural significance that these lessons represent. They're hands-on, they're engaging, they're important, and they're learning inside the classroom how they should treat our community and our ecosystems and natural resources outside of the classroom. So we try to make their learning real world relevant for them as much as possible.
Absolutely. So what I would love to find out more is how much are you and your team, are you taking these ideas that are recommended by state standards, or have you decided as a school community that it's important? And how are you making it more hands-on? What are you doing to make it as real-world applicable for your students as possible?
Sure. So some of it is decided by the state of Alaska for different grade levels what should be taught. So, for example, our social studies unit is about different Alaska Native cultures. And then some of the science lessons that we do involve hands-on salmon activities. We do these lessons to create a hands-on experience, meaning that we want students to not be afraid to, touch the fish, help them understand the internal organs and system functions of local fish. We teach them things like there are 5 types of salmon in Alaska, and we're going to use our hand to learn. So we have the chum, thumb, and we have the sockeye, because you can, and I'm holding my hand up for those who can't see, but we have the sockeye, and you can sock them in the eye with this finger, and then the middle finger is the king salmon, the ring finger is the silver salmon, because that's where people can wear their wedding ring, and then we have our pinky for our pink salmon, and the kids just love it. They never forget it, and we talk about, we make learning as fun as possible, and use even, parts of our body with our hands. We, like I said earlier, we invite parents in, and they're able to dissect salmon and observe and look at their different organs, and just make the activities as fun and as hands-on as possible. We do have to warn the kids, especially kids who aren't used to fish or fishing, if you're uncomfortable at any time, like step away or back up with your chair, but watch your adult help that's in the classroom dissect them and ask questions and be curious about what's around you. And so those are just some kind of ways we make those activities hands-on. And the salmon dissection is probably my favorite, so that's probably why I've been talking about it a lot. And we're doing it right now. So
I love it.
Fresh on the mind.
Yeah, and especially since we're talking about a 3rd grade classroom. I mean, I can tell you right now, classrooms in Pennsylvania, I won't say every classroom, but most classrooms, they're not dissecting anything until probably 7th grade, maybe 6th grade, depending on when middle school starts. So I think
maybe owl pellets. That's about it. Yeah.
Owl pellets, of course. Yeah, no, and I mean, on top of salmon dissecting, we're also hatching salmon. So our salmon eggs are outside in the hallway in an aquarium, and they just hatched a week ago, and we're able to talk with the kids about the different life cycle of salmon. And right now that our salmon in the tank have their egg sacs still attached to their stomach, and we talk about how they're living off of those nutrients. And when the fish are ready, we'll, as a class, go on a field trip and release them into one of the local rivers here. So we're not only dissecting salmon and learning about them, we're being part of the community and raising salmon and then releasing them after they've hatched. So just a few different ways to involve them in the community.
Absolutely. I don't know if you're familiar, Ken, but at least in Pennsylvania, there is, the Department of Wildlife and Fishing do have these similar programs that a lot of times can be through the funding of fishermen, people that are getting their tags and what have you, can actually fund a lot of classroom experiences. That is a possibility in Pennsylvania with more native fish than salmon, because salmon would not necessarily survive in our culture. But what's kind of neat is we have some similarities, but it being a more hobby than a lifeline for a lot of people here is the clear difference in priority, which is kind of interesting to see why that's such an integral part. Whereas for us, it might just be a show and tell style activity, or if you're really interested, you're going directly to the game and wildlife style kind of experts to get that information.
Mm-hmm.
But
and
I guess go ahead, please.
I was just going to say, and I think a lot of states have this, fish and game resources, but I don't think that a lot of them are able or understand, I guess, that they can reach out and have things provided for classroom experiences for kids to have those experiences. But you're right. I don't think that it might be the same where you are, whereas we need and we live off of these fish. And if we don't fill up our freezers, we could be in big trouble during the winter.
Totally. Yeah, I think that difference of the necessity is really interesting, because we as educators, at least in fourth grade, the classic is learn about your state. And that's so much for us landmarks and historical events and general geography about our state. So little of it is, I don't want to say vital information. It's just necessary for them to be able to recognize. Do I need the kids to be able to recite the state animal or the state tree? They're supposed to know that. Is that changing, how they grow up to be older adults? I don't know if that's necessarily changing too much. One of the things that I just can't get off of in my brain is the infusion of culture that you've mentioned a few times of your local area and how important that is. For us, Ken, I don't know if I can speak for you or other teachers. I feel like I'm the authority on academic content that I need to explore with kids, and they get so much of their culture at home and by the organizations that they're a part of. Whereas what I'm hearing is, we have times that we can embrace it, but it is somewhat separated from the school environment and the at-home environment. Whereas it just seems like your values, like I know you mentioned before, you guys as a community, not just, I'm sure, your principal, your admin making a decision about snow days or different decisions based off what the community needs. And it might be as obvious as making sure that the freezers are stocked for the winter, because that's a necessity. I'll before kind of tapping into that, also I teach in an area of Amish Lancaster County where the Plain people use very primitive ways of maintaining life. So farming is absolutely massive, and if they have a rough farming season, it is really difficult for them to survive. Now there's a ton of tourism that definitely helps things, but they, based off religious and values, are so dependent on that it really is wild when I live in a world where I just go to the local grocery store and I get what I need. That is a lot of context to just say, do you feel like you have more of a responsibility? It sounds like your culture and the current events of your town and what your community and families and grade level need sometimes shadow the academic responsibility as a teacher. Am I reading that correctly, or is it just trying to find that marriage, that balance between the two?
I feel yes and no. I feel like we do have a responsibility as teachers here to follow the curriculum, as I'm sure that's,
Everywhere.
how it everywhere.
Absolutely.
Follow the pacing guide, what day are we on? Are we on the right lesson that we're supposed to be on? But we do have to kind of figure out how we can balance the curriculum and what the students are learning about the outside world that isn't, Alaska culture and community, and try to fit the relevance in community-wise in other places, if that makes sense. So if a student isn't understanding a math problem because it's talking about, Joe is farming, as you're talking about farming, I'm just trying to think in my head, farming, and they get a basket of apples. If kids aren't relating to the question, we might tweak it a little bit using something else that's more relevant to them. And so I will tell you, even though I was born and raised here, I am not of Alaska Native culture. So I feel that there are many times where, for example, I had a new student from, and sorry if I'm kind of jumping around topics here. I'm just kind of thinking about this. Thank you. I had a student come to the classroom, moved to Anchorage from a village called Napaskiak, and they're Alaskan Native. They came to the classroom. I introduced them to everybody else and kind of went about my teaching style. And I remember that the kiddo was shut down and very quiet. And even though I was born and raised in Alaska, I got really close to him and I was trying to make eye contact with him. And I was talking really fast and I have a higher voice and just trying to engage with him. And his mom had come in to bring him lunch that he had forgotten on his first day. And she goes, "Oh, just so you know, our culture is not really eye-to-eye contact unless you're family, especially when they get to know you for the first time. There are times where we talk slower, not because we don't understand, but that is how we speak to each other." And I kind of felt so silly because I'm going, "Oh, and here I am. La, 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 welcome. How are you? Why aren't you looking at me? How can I help you with your work?" In this kiddo's face who wasn't used to that culturally. So, I mean, I'm still learning what's appropriate and what's not appropriate and how to engage students of different backgrounds and how to meet their needs socially, emotionally, and academically. So we do, to get back all the way back around to your question, we do try to pick curriculums in the state that incorporate our way of living, but we still, we can't just, kind of toss out lessons for the day because we want to, I don't know. I mean, here I'm going back and forth. If we have a moose that comes right up to our classroom window, we will stop and we'll go and we'll look at the window and talk about it. Or if it starts snowing, even though they're used to snow, they have to go to the window as third graders and see it and look at it. And we talk about snowflakes and how they're all different. And then we read Snowflake Bentley. It just depends on the kids' moods and reading them and how it works in our classroom, the flow of our classroom, like I'm sure it is in many other places in the United States.
And, speaking to that student, that's something that teachers are always going to be facing, whether it's students who have different special needs or are coming from different cultures. I know in my district and many that I've talked with, there's a growing population of English language learner students coming to our schools. There's just a large influx of that right now, and understanding that culture it's not necessarily our responsibility to understand every culture and every background of every student, but being empathetic to think about that and not saying to a student, "Look me in the eye," especially if you're disciplined, if you're involved in some sort of disciplined conversation. They might not be doing it because it's uncomfortable for them or because, like you just spoke to, it's not a part of their culture or their background or the way things operate in their own household. And so understanding that is incredibly difficult. It's very difficult for us to always be thinking of that, being empathetic towards that, because we are so busy. We are trying our best to engage students in instruction as well as teaching and guiding them to improve as human beings overall. So I think
and
it's
meeting their needs as a whole. You're right about that.
Right. Exactly.
Making your classroom a welcoming environment for any student, no matter their background or culture.
Absolutely. So I'd love to dig into your instructional style a little bit more, because I love the conversation that we're circling around in terms of getting to know students and bringing in the community and the relationships. So aside from the hands-on projects that we're talking about and involving the local things, what is your math instruction or your reading instruction look like? What's a go-to strategy that you love to use to create that instructional experience for students?
One of my favorite instructional strategies is the way that I group students. I like to move students around a lot. I like to have them do think, pair, share. I like to have them be in groups and really create a dialogue around their learning that's centered around their thinking. So I like to be that teacher that's kind of guiding them to their to the topics they want them to kind of think about. But when I'm able to not do so much, direct instruction and get the kids thinking about their learning, and like I said, creating that dialogue for them, I feel they learn so much from each other. And there are a lot of times where with math instruction and reading instruction, there's a lot of direct, whole group lessons that I need to with my class that it requires me to talk a lot and requires me to show our math slides or my reading slides and go over the core standards and objectives and what I need to teach them. But the second I'm able to get off of that, I feel the kids really flourish in my classroom. And I really try to have kids not only have a strong relationship with me and them, but with each other, and have those conversations about their learning. They love working with each other. It's hard for me to walk by other classrooms, and not that this is bad, but it's hard for me to walk by classrooms and kids are silent and they're working, and it makes me, I don't know, kind of sad. I know sometimes we do have to have that. That's really important, especially if they're taking an assessment. But I feel like really good classrooms also leave time and leave room and space for kids to talk and learn from one another. That wasn't, a specific answer, but
No, I love
I
it.
really think that conversation is important for students.
What are strategies or specific things that you started to do over time the more you've wanted to engage your students in these conversations? Because I completely agree with you. It's so important for them to have those relationships with each other, learn from each other. But as you do it more, at least I found in my own classroom, you start to realize that there are specific things that we can do to facilitate it in a much more positive, effective way. So as you're encouraging these conversations with your students, how is it progressing throughout the year or scaffolding throughout the year to get more value and more depth out of these conversations amongst your third graders?
I think that just making sure that you're asking them open-ended questions and that their responses aren't just yes or no answers, that students are able to have that opportunity to respond to each other. That's not just yes or no, in the same way that where I ask open-ended questions, I want them to be able to ask each other open-ended questions. And a big conversation that we have in my classroom is, if you don't agree with someone, what is a response that you can say? And they can say, I hear a lot of when I walk around the room and just hear their conversations, I hear a lot of students say, I don't really agree with you, but I kind of want to know more about where your thinking and your answer is coming from. And then the student will explain more, and then they go, I can see where you're coming from. This is what I'm thinking, and here's where I'm coming from. And I feel that having my third graders practice this kind of conversation is also practicing skills that they're going to need when they become adults in the real world. There are lots of adults, I'm sure we've all met them, who don't have those social skills to talk and agree respectfully with one another. And so that is a big part of our conversations in the classroom when we're learning. So asking open-ended questions, talking about, those sentence frames and how they can respond to each other. If I hear things that I'm not really sure are kind, or if students kind of get stuck and stop talking, we do I do, we do, you do, and I model that, and they continue to practice that. We also, I try to make the learning as student led and as student directed as possible. So like I said, if, I try to, I'm sorry, I'm trying to think of all the different, everything is coming into my head at once. Just letting them partner work as much as possible, pairing them with new people, pairing them with people that really might not be their best friends, and just creating that culture in the classroom where they feel like they can openly share and have that dialogue with one another.
Right. I agree. And Matt, I'll let you jump in because I'm hogging the mic right now. But the two things that you said that I just want to reiterate are establishing relationships amongst each other. You know, as teachers, we focus so much on, we talked earlier about creating those positive relationships with our students, but we have to recognize the need for that community and that trust and that relationship amongst each other. And facilitating curriculum conversations is a great way to do that. And the other part that you said about teaching them how to respond to others, teaching them how to disagree with someone and share why they disagree. These are skills that we have to explicitly teach our students, whether we're teaching third grade or we're teaching 11th grade. It's skills that we constantly need to reinforce with our students. Sorry, Matt.
No, I was going to kind of add to this because it sounds like your emphasis is really developing great people, you know, that they interact and they have the soft skills of how to work with each other, why it's important to work with each other, you know, constructive ways to navigate if you're having a disagreement, but still make it a productive conversation. Is there any structure to the how? Like, is that a proactive strategy that you plan out? Hey, whether it, you know, some schools do a character trait a month, or, you know, they're going to emphasize certain things, you know, different times of the year. Is that something proactive, or do you find so much of it just being a reminder of, you know, our values and guidance on how to navigate a tough situation?
I feel like over time I've kind of just done this with as many lessons as I can, and I also feel like maybe a part of it is who I am and how maybe how I was treated in school when I was younger, how, you know, I'm a mom of 3, and how I want my children to be treated in school. I've always felt that building strong and real and respectful relationships with students is really important, because if it can impact them so strongly that they will not only begin to show a willingness to learn and be respectful, but that it creates a foundation for them in understanding what it means to be cared for and be respected by adults in their school, and respect or cared for among each other in the classroom. I think that I kind of just do this purposefully with my lessons, because most of my career has been at Title I schools, and like I've mentioned earlier, I had a lot of kids with trauma where they would shut down, where they didn't feel heard, where listening to maybe me teach all day was boring for them. So I would try to think of ways that I can still elicit responses from them and have them just fall in love with learning. That wasn't so, you know, we're doing this. Okay, the timer's on. We're quiet. Do your work. I wanted to somehow teach, you know, respect and love. And I feel like their desired behavior and their academic drive and the desired classroom is best achieved when we alter our classroom management styles in order to account for relationships first. And I feel like it's also a big classroom management strategy when we have those relationships with each other, and they know that we can all talk, you know, peacefully and respectfully when we get into, you know, when we don't maybe disagree with each other. I think it's really important that they don't feel shut down or not valued and not heard.
As you do it more in your classroom, I found the more I did this in my classroom, the more I created opportunity. I wanted to create opportunities for the students to interact with each other. A lot of things that we do as we become comfortable and confident, it just becomes natural. And the relationship piece that you're talking about, I think, is part of that. However, I found that the more I wanted to engage students in meaningful conversation amongst themselves, the more I actually started to, I don't want to say script, but plan those questions and plan those activities, because I realized that there's so much I did on the fly. And I will admit that I did a lot on the fly as a classroom teacher, especially being in fifth grade, especially being in fifth grade for so long. Yeah. And that's what good teaching is. But if I was being completely honest, when I planned those opportunities and those higher level questions, that's when these experiences had so much more meaning and depth. So can you speak to that? Do you agree with that? What are some strategies you're using for that?
Absolutely. So I'm trying to think of, there are, at my school, I have, there are 3 days for 30 minutes that we're given to do social emotional learning lessons. And sure, there are a few days where I can come in and be like, oh, do I want to read a social emotional learning book, or what kind of do I want to do? But there was on one of my teacher of the year trips, another teacher who had all of the teachers stand up, and we made a small circle. We had a small circle in the middle, and then a larger circle of teacher of the years on the outside. And the outside circle of teachers would turn around and close their eyes, and then the people in the middle would go around and touch gently or tap another teacher's shoulder, who someone might say, tap another teacher who's made a difference in your life. Tap someone who has been a good friend for you. Tap someone. And I started thinking about maybe doing that activity with my students. And then at home, I would think about questions that would relate to their age and would mean a lot to them. And when I had planned that lesson out very thoroughly and thought it through, and my students did it, I had tears in some of my students' eyes when they were just quietly hanging their head and feeling people tap them and feeling the difference that they've made amongst the peers in their classrooms meant a lot to them. And I had them ask later in the day, can we do it again? And then the next day, can we do it again? And I'm going, oh, well, you're right, that when you plan out really meaningful, and not just with SEL, but really meaningful lessons with math or reading, those are the ones that they remember and the ones that mean the most to them, for sure. And I forgot your question. I'm sorry. Can you edit that out?
No, that's fine. You answered it perfectly. It's so important for us to do our best to think about that, and regardless of how experienced we are, we do have to remember that when we plan with intention, that's where some of the greatest things happen. It doesn't mean that we can't pivot on the fly, teachable moments. We know all that. We can run with all that, but I often will, when I'm speaking at other districts, a phrase I like to use is empowering experiences, and it's as much time as you put into planning the delivery of the content of a lesson, you should put into planning the experiences that the students are going to have, where they can interact with each other and interact with the curriculum. So, start thinking about planning those experiences as much as you think about planning your slides and what you're going to say and do to introduce that content.
Absolutely. It's those moments that they remember, those teachable moments.
Mm-hmm. Can I kind of ask you, Kelly, this really is for both of you. I think one of the difficult things that we are gaining understanding is, we're talking about relationships. We all can say that we understand that relationships are important. I think all three of us and a lot of educators have found themselves almost feeling like they stumble into good relationships because they're just asking questions of the kids and making connections. It's not a forced thing. One of the classic activities that, you see on social media is the classic, I wish my teacher knew this about me type activity. And one of the things that you were kind of mentioning as well, Kelly, like, when can you feel a class, because it is kind of not forced, that relationship? There are special activities, but you have to make sure your kids are at the vulnerable spot to answer that question, to be productive. If you do it too soon, then it feels like you're forcing it to happen, and they may not feel comfortable to open up, and you spend so much of this time thinking it's fine. If you do it too late, it almost feels like, I wish I knew that sooner and I could have done something different. Did I make the connections I was hoping for? How do you judge, when you do some of these more vulnerable activities, that it's the right time to gain that information?
I really try to feel it out with them.
If I were to challenge you, because I think that's where, a lot of times good teaching, we really struggle to identify why we do it. We just know it's a good thing to do. And I know we spend so much time trying to tear apart, oh, why was my natural thought to do this and this and this? And it's because I've been through the experience. But if I were to peel that back for a second year teacher that desperately goes in, this year I need to make relationships, and they force it. They create a wedge more so than a relationship. So the challenge is really, how do we speak to that being part of our nature, being natural, and then also the right time, because we are lucky we've been doing this long enough. Body language is probably something we read better than actual handwriting and vocals at this point, just because of how long we've been doing it. How do we develop that as soon as possible for a newer teacher?
I can jump in first if you don't mind, Kelly, and then
Oh, yeah,
and then you
sure.
can follow up. So for me, I'm going to answer your question, then I'm actually going to add on a little thing that I thought was going to be your question. So in terms of feeling it out, my strategy was always being as vulnerable as possible first. So life lessons with Mr. Ehrman was a common phrase that the kids heard in my class, based on things that were happening in the world, based on things that were happening that day in our classroom, or may have happened at the cafeteria or the recess yard. And it was me offering my perspective on what happened, a different way to think about it, a different way to think about someone's experience, my own experience. So I tried to incorporate those as much as possible, where I was leading the conversation, but also leaving it open to questions and comments from the students. And as the year progressed, I was able to get more and more out of them because they felt more comfortable with me and, with more importantly, with each other. And so that was a gauge for me where I was continually vulnerable in a professional and comfortable way for me, that it pulled that out more of them. Doing team building activities was another one, and just watching the interactions of the students. How much are they listening to each other? How much are they arguing with each other? Are they arguing with each other in a positive way? So creating experiences where they could see me be vulnerable, and it opened it up the opportunity for their vulnerability, was one way. And then the other way was things that require them to be a cohesive unit that weren't emotional. They were competition driven. So doing team building activities where they're trying to break a fake record that I made up so that they have some motivation to do that as a cohesive unit. So building those two pieces in, and it's still going to fall on that piece of reading the room and reading the students and using those instincts. But I was doing it in a deliberate way where I was creating opportunity to read those instincts. The other thing that I want to add here, we talked about forming relationships with students and strategies to do so. And this is where I thought you were going to go with the conversation. I'm going to give the least personal strategy you can use to form relationships with students. When you talk to them and you pry something out about them, whether it's just how many people they have living at their house or activities that they do, have a class roster sitting somewhere on your desk and write down that information, so that you don't have to remember it, especially secondary teachers that have hundreds of students. Write it down and bring it up in a very purposeful, meaningful way. You don't have to remember everything about every kid, but if you write it down, it gives you something to refer back to. And so that's not being personal in the sense that you're not genuinely remembering everything, but it is because you're creating a system to create that personal opportunity.
Absolutely, 100%. And I just want to add on to what you both said about, and Ken, what you said about being vulnerable. I'm very intentional about letting my students know who I am as a person. They know that I have a family. They know that I love to do certain hobbies, and they know that I dislike certain foods, because I think that for them to let me in and get to know them, it's really important that I've created those opportunities for them to get to know me. And I'll tell you, if my child is ever sick and I have to be home, I'll come to the school and I'll write my sub plans and make my copies. But on the board, I'll say, I'm really going to miss you guys today. I can't make it in. I have to be mom today. I hope you understand, but I can't wait to come back tomorrow and be teacher with you. And so I just being open and real, like I'm a person too. And when they see me at the store, I have to buy food too. And I have my students say, I thought that you lived at the school. I'm going, no, I have to eat and be a person too. They love those moments. And you're right. When you talk about creating those experiences, I do want to mention that something that will stick with me for a long time is, in the morning when kids come in, you're busy, you're taking attendance, you're putting out the morning work, you're writing on the board, your announcements are coming on, you're walking around, you're very busy, kids are turning in things, they're talking to you and asking questions. And one year I was writing on the board, and I had one of my students next to me, and they're, Mrs. Shrein, this happened, and I was writing on the board, and I'm going, yeah, and I'm nodding my head, and I'm saying the things that, you're supposed to say when you're listening. And finally my student stopped and they go, this is a third grader, and they go, Mrs. Shrein, can you please, show me the listening skills that you tell us we need to show? And I remember thinking, oh my goodness, I didn't realize that I wasn't showing you listening. And they said, can you please, really, really kindly, they said, can you please put the marker down and the cap on and just listen, like look at me? And I remember thinking, I wasn't making eye contact. I was kind of walking around and doing things, and my back was turned while they were talking to me. And I like to feel in some way I was a part of that. Maybe I wasn't, but I was really thankful that they were able to tell me, their adult teacher, please put the marker down and look at me and stop walking around, engage with me. And I went, oh, you're absolutely right. And I know that that's hard a lot of the time. And sometimes we have to say, I have to finish this. Can you please go to your seat? But I felt after that moment, I had to definitely be more intentional with them. They know, they're young kids, but they know when they're really being listened to, and you're really responding to them genuinely, and not just, yep, okay, yeah, cool. They want more than that. Mm-hmm. Just like adults do.
You were 100% part of that, because one, you taught them those listening skills, and two, they had to feel comfortable with you to be able to say that. They're not going to say that to a teacher that they don't love. So you were 100% part of that. And it's what you're saying is something we need to hear as parents too.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Probably not harder. A bad thing. Yeah. And I'm sure like it hurts your heart as much as it, can. The immediate response is often defensiveness. No, but then realizing how real and honest, I would never not pay attention. And then you have to realize you're trying to do too many things at once. I guess the one thing that I want to add on to what you said, because I feel very much like both of you hit these awesome points related to this, is like all things, whether it's an academic skill or a soft skill, your formative assessments of their comfort and their vulnerability modeled by you, realistically, what you hear from them shouldn't be a massive surprise, because you're not just doing the SEL activity to say that you did the SEL activity. So you may learn something through that. Like we often hear, oh my goodness, my kid took this as the most important thing, which is totally different than the objective. Okay, that may be a reality, but it really should be something that if you are integrating it, not just incorporating it, it shouldn't be a huge surprise, the results of whatever that said activity is. And I know that's a pretty obvious thing, but the other part of this is, comes back to that modeling, and what that modeling looks like from an adult remembering what's appropriate to be vulnerable to a third grader or a fourth grader or a fifth grader. Sometimes, I know that's a big asterisk that you feel like you shouldn't have to say, an animal in my life passes away, or, it's been a tough morning. Those type of things the kids read because they spend so much time with us. That's the beauty of it. It is a give and take, but they can tap into it. And when you hide it, it almost, obviously they can tell. And not that you need to disclose, but if there is a way for you to be vulnerable, to show that in a time of need, to give them the chance to rise up and support you, like you said, it is a perfect time for kids to prove to you the values you've instilled and what is expected in that classroom. And, of course, that you're going to follow those features as well is really cool. I don't think that you could have had a better response, an eye-opening response than, being called out for something very reasonable. Shows the true values of your classroom, which is very cool.
Absolutely. And I didn't even know that I was doing it. I thought I was giving the correct responses. So that's just something that I will always remember. Oh, you're right. I need to be more intentional listening to you.
And that happens. We're making all these decisions all of the time, and, juggling too many balls in the air. And that is a natural component. I know Ken is going to want to push us into the exit ticket, but your background, for those who are able to watch, is a beautiful map of the United States. And I see postcards from a variety, not all, but can you kind of speak to that? Because I do feel like a lot of times our responsibilities as classroom teachers is to expand kids' perspectives of the world, whether that's our country, just our state, if that's a large state, or, possibly world. Can you just, I'm fascinated by that and, what that means or the importance behind that.
Sure. So I joined this group on social media where classroom teachers from all over the United States could sign up, one per state, obviously, and then we would send each other postcards about our states, some really cool facts, some maybe famous people that are from their states, what their life is like as third grade students in other areas. And I have many students who have never been on an airplane and have never gotten out to see anything but Alaska. So I feel like Alaska specifically is so far removed from the continental 48, the lower 48 is what we call it. And I wanted them to hear from other 8, 9-year-olds about what life was like where they were, where they're from. So since September, we sent ours out. I let the kids draft what they wanted to say and about Alaska, about our northern lights that we see during some months and how beautiful it is and some of our animals and how important hunting and fishing is to us and things like that. Together as a class, we talked about what they wanted to say. And then we sent those out. They helped me put every postcard stamp on all of those postcards, sent them out. And then slowly over time, we've been receiving postcards from other states and they love it. I mean, there are days where we won't get a postcard and they'll say, Miss Shrein, did we get a postcard? Did we get a postcard about, another state? We're still missing Texas. I'm like, I know, no, we haven't had another postcard, but they love hearing about what other places are like for other kids that are their age. And sometimes they're making connections. One kid wrote on one of the postcards up here, I don't remember which state it was, but he said, this is what we're learning in school, and this is what we're doing as a school community. And then when I get home, I do my homework and I play Roblox. And my kids went, oh my goodness, I play that too. And I'm going, see, other kids are maybe playing video games and playing games that you like too. So they loved being able to relate to other kids around the country that is their age.
What? Yeah. Honestly, that caught my eye too, Matt. So I'm glad you asked that. What is that social media? What's the group or you said a social media group? I want to add it to our notes so that other teachers can specifically find that too.
Oh,
that
sure. It's
and also that I can add it to
was.
my classroom too. That sounds awesome.
Yeah, there's many of them, and if I feel like I'm always lucky because a lot of the times it'll be a teacher will post on a teacher group that they're still looking for specific states, and I feel like Alaska's never taken. So I jump on it and I sign other teachers up. I signed my husband up for a postcard exchange too. But the one that I'm currently on is Mrs. Letcher's postcard exchange, and that's just one of many. There's third grade postcard, and this is on Facebook. I'm sorry, I'm on Facebook. There's many. Some years I'll see fourth grade teachers doing it, fifth grade teachers doing it. I try to stay within our grade level so kids can talk to other kids their age. Sometimes, some years we'll do pen pals instead of postcards. It'll be back and forth, assigned pen pals.
Right.
But this one
are these
Letcher's
Facebook
postcard.
groups? Is that what they typically are that you're finding them?
Yes. So I'm finding them in, there's in larger groups. So Teachers Ask Teachers is one of the Facebook groups that I'm a part of. Teacher memes, I've had a teacher post about looking for a group, and then within that larger Facebook group, usually there are if you search in the group, you can search for postcards, towards the beginning of school years or start one. I'm looking to do a postcard exchange, and many states will sign up, create a Google Doc, and have different states sign up, and so you can hopefully fill that up, and they'll send each other postcards.
Very cool.
The kids love it.
Yeah, I love that because it showcases a nice positive light to social media. And so what I'm gathering is there are teacher groups that you're a part of, and then every once in a while there's a teacher posting looking for it. So being active in that group is important. Or like you said, take that action yourself. So as Matt alluded to, Kelly, I could talk for a long time with you, but I do want to be respectful of your time. So the exit ticket is the same 4 questions we ask every guest every week to wrap up our show. So question number 1, What is the best thing a teacher can do to make a student school experience better?
I'm going to say continue to be purposeful about building those relationships with students, and not, again, forcing those relationships, but just doing talking to students about what comes natural. Even if it's as something as small as a student walks in and you notice they have a new pair of shoes on. I love your shoes. Where did you get them? I really like them. Just three positive comments to students throughout the week. Make it a goal to make a couple of students your target and give them positive comments and switch it up.
I love that. And I love the measurable piece, because the reality is it's impossible to successfully do it with all students if we're not keeping track and measuring somehow. And
Yes.
it's not
And can I just add
impersonal? Yeah, please.
Can I just add to that? Not only building those relationships with students, but also with their families. I wanted to add, because that's incredibly important too. Lots of positive sticky notes and positive phone calls. Really, really, really important.
Positive phone calls go so much further than, pretty much anything else. Because, it is a quick, 360, well, maybe 180 is a better way to put it. They hear the phone call coming from the school. The assumption is usually not positive. To be taken by surprise is pretty wonderful. The next question for you is really, what is the best piece of advice that you've received, maybe from a colleague, a supervisor, or even a student?
If you're invited to a baseball game or a birthday party or, a cheerleading competition by one of your students, I know it's outside of contract hours, and sometimes it's really hard when we have families and other obligations when we're educators, but try your best to show up. Even if it's for 5 or 10 minutes, it could mean the world to another student, to one of your students, and it's something that they might always remember. So if you can, try to show up if you're invited, because they invited you for a reason. They really wanted you to come. And it's, again, that relationship piece. So don't be afraid to see a student outside of school, of course, with family permission, and say hello and show up if they took the time to invite you.
Absolutely. I will add, Ken made this comment, and I think about it frequently. You can go to another student's event, and that communicates to the entire class. Even if if you don't go to theirs, the fact that you took time to go to one of your classmates also builds those relationships. So, obviously, am I going to choose an event where I can go and see hopefully 3 or 4 of my kids? That sounds great. Then, that might be the best thing for me to do at that time. But if you make that time, it makes a difference to everyone. The next question comes down to dealing with how the school year, we know it goes in waves. There are days that maybe weeks that we struggle to survive and get through. So what's something you feel like you would like to share with educators to help them power up through those moments of struggle?
That we all have them. I mean, I may be Alaska or 2020. I can't even talk. I may be the 2022 Alaska State Teacher of the Year, but none of this came easy. I have my days where I'm struggling as well, and I try to follow the advice that I give my students. I take a big breath. You can have moments where it's okay to stop a lesson and say, okay, this isn't going the way that I planned. I planned this for so long and it's not turning out the way I want it to. Let's all pause and just take a moment. Have a brain break. Those are okay. And try to continue from there. That it's okay to have those bad days and those moments. You are a person too. You are not a super person. You're going to have those moments, and it's okay to give yourself grace in those times. I mean, every day is a new day, and your students are resilient, and they understand, and they can read you, and they understand if you're just not having a great moment. You can get past that and try again.
I love it.
And then go home and, have a bubble bath. That's okay. That's what I do.
Yep.
Like, it's bubble bath time.
Exactly. It's so easy to fall into facilitating a repetitive classroom. What is it that you think separates teachers who are the ones constantly seeking to change, innovate, and adopt new teaching strategies into their classroom?
I think it's teachers that want to connect with their students in different ways outside of what the curriculum tells us to do. Teachers who want to continue to learn, go to professional developments, like to read books, like to try new things. And I really think teachers who make it a priority to build relationships outside of their classroom with other adults in the building, where they can be a soundboard to each other, learn from each other, always keeping an open mind, because even as an experienced teacher, I don't know everything. Even as Alaska Teacher of the Year, I know I don't know everything, and I constantly have things that I can learn and things that I can improve on. And I just make it a priority to talk to other adults in my building and other staff members and learn from them. Even first year teachers, I learn a lot from. To just reach out and don't just shut your classroom door and be a one-room schoolhouse. Get out there and talk with other educators. You will continue to learn and grow.
I know I can say that I've appreciated this conversation. It feels you are an incredible educator. That is very evident, and the awards don't need to make that clear. But I appreciate how you make teaching sound normal and reasonable, because you're consistent in, it sounds like you do whatever it is to love your kids very consistently. And it's been fun to kind of be a part of that journey for a few minutes tonight. But I've enjoyed this conversation. I can speak to Ken. I know he's enjoyed this conversation as well. I know that I'd love to continue, following your journey. Is there a way that we can continue to learn from you, interact with you, whether that's social media or a website, anything to keep that conversation going?
Sure, absolutely. And I just want to say that I've had an incredible time talking to both of you as well. And I feel like I've learned from both of you tonight some of the strategies that you incorporate into your classrooms. But I do have social media. I have Facebook. I have Twitter. My Twitter account is solely based on my professional endeavors and things that I'm always trying to learn as an educator. And that's at Kelly Shrein, KELLYSHREIN. I usually share on there some teaching tips and tricks of mine and my journey through education and my journey with my students, projects that we do, things like that. So that's a good platform that I'll be on, as well as Facebook. And I do have an Instagram. I'm just not on that as much.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Go ahead, Matt.
I was just going to say, I think, you have your dominant platform. Instagram's my wife's platform. It is not mine. So don't blame you.
I agree. So Kelly, thank you so much for joining us. We will link up to your social media handle on our show notes page, as well as the description of this on the podcast and YouTube. So thanks again. You clearly are making a huge difference. This has been a great experience. I love learning about how you're incorporating your community into your classroom and how you're approaching relationships from a very purposeful and empathetic standpoint to make your classroom as best a place it can be for your students. So please continue to do that and to have a positive impact on education overall. So thank you again for your time. And Matt, why don't you take us on out of here?
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you. It's been an honor.
Absolutely.
So as we power down this episode, without a doubt, Kelly, you have left us feeling powered up. Thank you for the time, and everyone, will talk to you next week.
Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. If you haven't already, please subscribe on whichever platform you're listening to or watching us on YouTube. Each week we get to talk to amazing educators who are making a positive impact on the lives of students, their colleagues, administrators, and education as a whole. It's been such a privilege every week to be able to talk to these incredible individuals, learn from them, grow with them, and better myself and all of education through these conversations. If you haven't already, please consider sharing this with a colleague, someone who can benefit and be powered up from the experience of listening to these incredible conversations. Because of Powered Up, we are powering education by empowering you.